Hi, Giovanna Lewis. Welcome to 10 by 6.
Hello, hi Jason. Hi, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. And Giovanna, you've been out and about in recent times of Insulate Britain um, and the campaign that they're currently putting in process to raise awareness of the climatic catastrophe that awaits. So can you tell us a little bit about, Insulate Britain from your perspective and also what you've been up to?
So I mean, Insulate Britain is made up of a very wide range of people who will have all come to it, for slightly different reasons. But the main thrust of it is that it's about how do we respond to what's coming, what's starting, and what's coming down the line, the horrors for the world and for our country. How do we get something done about that? And at the same time, think well about people now and in the future. So it's about preserving the climate, but it's actually about trying to create some sort of sensible, simple, clear action that can look after people and look now and look after us in the future. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Properly, sensibly, and well, all of the hope. So Insulate Britain is about trying to put pressure on the government to invest in a massive sort of infrastructure project to insulate all the homes in the UK, social housing, council housing by 2025, and the rest of the houses by 2030. I don't think many people know that in 2019, 8,500 people died because of the cold. People who had to choose between heating and eating. That's the kind of thing that we think is a disgrace. We believe the government is not looking after the people of the nation if they can sit by and allow that to happen. So we wanted to bring that statistic out to the fore. We also know that by setting about this massive infrastructure project, if you want to call it that thousands and thousands of jobs will be created, good jobs for ordinary working people, and that will boost the economy in a very positive way. So we wanted to be part of that. So this is the kind of social side for ordinary working people. And then also alongside that, the UK, depending on what you read, the UK's carbon emissions, about 15% of them approximately are down to bad leaky homes and domestic heating. So set about a project like this and you can make a real good impact very quickly on the UK's carbon emissions. There are lots of other things that can be done, but we felt that this was very clear, very tangible. It would save lives, it will create jobs, which will generate more tax, boost the economy and reduce carbon emissions. We know that people out there are concerned about global warming and climate change, and we're all sitting around anxious and scared, wanting things to be done. So here is something very tangible and practical.
Is all new builds, are they obligated now to be insulated?
Okay, I'm not an expert on that, but I've been told that there are standards, but that generally they're not sufficient and they're not adequate, and that they should be better and they could be better. So that's for the new builds, but we're talking about mainly the retrofitting as well of all existing homes.
Right. And in terms of the targets that you talked about earlier, in terms of council social housing by 2025, is there any attempt by the government at this point to have started that project?
Well, the government have kind of played around, if you want, for want of a better word, with various schemes. I believe that there have been 3 schemes in the last 10 years with varying criteria, but they haven't really touched on what needs to be done. I think it's something like 1% of what needs to be done that I read. So, and the last scheme sort of collapsed because it was complex. The workers that were supposed to, the contractors that they were trying to encourage to do the work became uninterested. Those that did some of the work had a lot of trouble actually getting paid, and the paperwork was pretty awful. So a lot of people walked away from it. So yeah, people get confused because yes, there are schemes and some people can get support and can get insulation, but it's too small a number, and often it's actually inadequate. It's not ambitious enough, the type of insulation that needs to happen. And alongside that, there's also stuff around planning laws that needs to work with a big project, because there are lots of restrictions on using good methods of insulation because it might change the outside appearance of the house. So we've got to think beyond that as well. So we've got to break through those limitations.
Yes. So it almost needs the government to take firm leadership to effectively make the planning laws more straightforward, to make sure that the people who are installing the insulation aren't disincentivized economically, and that the bureaucracy is such that it doesn't make it complicated and difficult for those households that need it.
Absolutely. You've got it in a nutshell, really. You've said it well. Thank you. Yeah. So that's basically it.
Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Now, obviously, this comes on to sort of the actual campaign itself. The campaign has been to block roads in and around airports, to block the M25, etc. And what we've tended to find, certainly from the corporate media, is that there's this perspective that the public generally are sympathetic, are supportive of the outcomes, but one of the things that keeps being played out, in the corporate media particularly, is the way in which the Insulate Britain are going about it. So in terms of the blocking road strategy and the idea that it's blocking emergency services and stopping people getting to work and stopping people taking their loved ones to hospital, etc., etc. Can you justify for us, Giovanna, what it is about this particular campaign that you hope will bring about the outcomes that you've outlined?
Yeah, well, in order to campaign on anything and make people aware, you do have to get into the media and the press. That's the way it works. So doing the usuals, as you probably heard people say, we've tried all the usual ways: petitions, letters, protests that are sort of slightly regulated. That does not change anything, okay? For decades, people have been trying that. There is now an urgency, and we don't have decades to wait. We need urgent change. So a way of doing that, it's like, how do you get that message out? How do you wake people up who are busy with their lives, who are preoccupied doing lots of other things? And how do you wake up and shake up the government? So you have to go in for what's called civil disruption, basically. You have to disrupt. You have to do something that's a bit shocking and kind of unpopular to draw in people's attention, if that's making sense. So by disrupting the roads, yes, we are inconveniencing, lots of people's lives. And we're not happy that we have to do that, but we feel that we're forced to do that. Because it is what will bring attention to what needs to be done in a way that all the other mechanisms don't. And we don't have time any longer to wait for all the other mechanisms that probably won't work anyway. We need to get this on the agenda, out there, being talked about and being pushed for. And that's why blocking roads is creating the level of disruption that will be out there in the media. And also, by now it should be kind of affecting the economics of this country, going for economic disruption. And that's usually when a government listens, is when it might be affecting the pockets or the economy or, the mechanisms of industry and all of that stuff. So that's another reason for doing this, is sort of trying to bring things to a halt. A bit like when people went on strike years ago, when people go on strike, the buses stop, the trains stop. The classic one was the miners. We didn't have coal for our heating and our lighting, for our energy. So it's about economic disruption and social disruption to bring about the attention that's needed to the dangers that are ahead and what needs to be done. Has that explained it all right?
It's explained it, but I don't think we've necessarily probably moved on from where the corporate media is at, because the corporate media whether it's, you know, Loose Women, or whether it's the newspapers, or whether it's Good Morning Britain or whatever. As I say, they keep repeating the idea that the public are generally supportive. It's just that what you then get plastered all over social media are lots and lots of videos of angry members of the public who are basically saying, you know, I support you, but I don't support this. I don't understand its rationale. I don't understand why having miles and miles of traffic queuing, chugging out carbon monoxide into the atmosphere, and obviously carbon dioxide, why that's beneficial to alleviating climate change. And I guess others will come in and say, look, you know, what about oil refineries? What about stopping coal coming into the country? Why not blockading airports? Why is it that the public, the general public, who are just going about their day-to-day business, why are they the ones that are being whacked and not the politicians and the macro economy, if you like, of fossil fuels, that where the problems are?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's easy to sort of think that that should be the way it's happening, because that's the way a lot of us as campaigners, that's where we've been putting our energies. I mean, how many people know that Farnham Airport was disrupted at the beginning of this week, that 3 entrances to that airport, it's a private airport used by very rich people, 30,000 flights go out of there a year. How many people in the country know about that? You know, targeting basically the fact that 1% of the world's population create 50% of the emissions from aviation, from air travel. That didn't get on Good Morning Britain, did it?
No.
You know, that didn't get on Talk Radio. That probably didn't get in The Sun and all of these places. So the good information that went with that is just lost.
Yes.
You know, but here we can get the message out. You know, we can tell people by causing disruption. That's what we've done. You know, we can tell people about the people who die, but I haven't answered your question, have I? So the corporate media, so the mainstream media, well, we all know that they are mainly owned by very rich people, the majority of them, who will all have their own agendas. And you know yourself, we live in this world where very rich people are hanging on to what they've got more and more. I mean, there's theories about that. And the corporate media is run by people with their own agenda, firstly, who don't want these messages out, who probably don't want to pay any taxes to invest in better lives for ordinary people. And also, you know, a lot of them are in it for the money. They want their advertising revenues. So, you know, there's nothing quite like a bit of divisiveness and hoo-ha and seeing people storming and angry on the road to bring in the public. And they're just really focusing, you know, with everything that's done, there is positives and negatives, and they're just focusing on the negatives in order to divide and distract, because a lot of them have vested interests here, you know, they definitely do. And it's not in their interest to reduce fossil fuel use and to possibly have to pay more of their taxes to look after ordinary people. Jason, I'm not sure if I've answered your question. I might have gone off on a tangent.
No, it's fine, Giovanna, it's fine. I mean, again, if we can just persevere. If I was somebody who lived in the London conurbation and I relied upon, for example, the M25 to get to work, or I did a car share with a number of other people and dropped them off on the way, and I was being inconvenienced, shall we say, every day in terms of getting to work. I was sat in queues, and I was just a normal average Joe or Joanne. And on the front page of the Daily Mail, the front page of the Sun or the Express or whatever, or on G&B or on Loose Women or on the news bulletins, they were constantly reinforcing my anxiety and frustrations and anger at being stopped from getting to work. I'm not undermining the corporate media. I'm buying into it. I'm more likely to celebrate it. So by angering the general public, what we're tending to find is that they're not holding their hands up and say, you know, this process of enlightenment, suddenly, you know, hallelujah, I've seen the light. It's not like that at all. They're just coming home, plopping themselves on the sofa, putting on the TV, and the news bulletin is basically saying back to them what they want to hear, because they're angry and frustrated. So instead of whereas, you know, the Farnham private airfield, something spectacular could have been done there in many locations around the country to really bring it to the public's attention. Instead, they're the ones that are being victimized and feeling extremely angry.
I get that they're feeling angry. I mean, you know, who wouldn't feel angry? You know, you only have to be in a traffic jam caused by an accident or a crash or whatever, you know, and we get cheesed off. So to think that people have caused your weight purposely, it is quite maddening and will make people angry, and we know that. And there's, you know, that's kind of part of the disruption. You know, that's a consequence of it, not a nice consequence. But something spectacular was done at the airport. They closed 3 entrances. They had people locked on. They had people glued on. They had some beautiful artwork going on and some great information, but it didn't get round because it hasn't affected enough people. And remember, you know, Insulate Britain as an organisation, we don't have millions of pounds, no. You know, we have a limited budget. So it's about how best can we create, wake up the population or get some reaction from the population with the resources that we've got. So we have to consider that as well. But, you know, what the mainstream media are not telling you, they're sort of not telling you that actually the government could have had us all in on remand way before now. You know, you go and, you know, anybody who gets arrested once and then goes out and does it again and then goes back to the police and says, if you release me, I'm going to do it again. They could be held on remand. The government could be doing this and they're not. So the question is, why aren't they stopping this? They could be stopping it in 2 ways. They could have these protesters in jail, or they could respond to the request and start insulating Britain. You know, it's a no-brainer really, because it's such a good thing to be doing. So why aren't we?
It is, but I guess
we know that the corporate media are going to do all this divisive stuff that they do and feed the negativity and try to ridicule us and try to ostracize us and blame us. That's part of what they do. Yeah. And they will do that towards any cause that's trying to fight for something better for ordinary people.
But they're not. I guess the other issue there is that they're not starting with a blank sheet. They're starting with people who are angry and frustrated, who have been the victims of this. So they're reinforcing it. And because they're not giving out that information generally, the public around the country, again, as I say, aren't having that enlightenment moment. They're just hearing about all these angry people, and they're basically supportive of these angry people. And I think the other side of it, of course, is the reason that the protesters and activists aren't on remand is because what the government don't want to do is to create the fact that these people are as activists have become, what's the word I'm after? It's completely got out of my head. But
effectively, like a martyr or something.
A martyr, that's exactly the word, Gia. Yeah, thank you so much. That's it. They're creating that martyrdom and then having all those court cases and all the publicity that comes with the court cases. As we've seen in the past, what tends to happen is they're arrested, they're removed, they get given a court date, and then they get to court and told there's no case to answer or nothing's going to proceed, because the last thing they want is all that mountain of publicity dominoing effect around the country. So it's just to clear the roads. They don't no real intention of ever having a proper court cases to follow that.
Well, I agree with you. I mean, that's a key bit of their strategy, isn't it? I mean, a lot of people are, with all of these actions, a lot of people, you know, with Extinction Rebellion, for example, a lot of people do go to court and they do get found guilty and they do have court costs and they do have fines to pay. A lot of the cases are dropped. And again, that will be what the corporate media try and highlight, because, you know, they're kind of saying that, you know, trying to put us down and have people pitted against us. And they're also doing that to the police. They're not doing it where it needs to be, which is the government. You know, it's the government that has the regulatory power to sort this out. Nobody else has it. They can either start insulating the houses in Britain or they can put us in jail. And we know, as you say, we know why they don't want to, because they don't want to create a cause and they don't want to do anything that might make us look good and have all the long debate and people realizing. But by disrupting, and there's a place where we're kind of like trying to wake up the population to something. And maybe the first step of that is that they have to be angry because they don't understand and they're frustrated. But maybe like some of those people will think, what's this about? Maybe some of them will go home. I mean, this is a very hopeful minority probably, and look at it a bit more. I mean, you know, on the road on Monday, a man came along and I thought, oh God, here we go. And he actually stood with a crowd of other people and said, I actually support what's going on. I'm in the traffic jam and I'm annoyed, but I support this and it's needed. The press would never report that. I also had a woman who brought up her child with her along the queue of traffic. And I think she was going to initially use the child as a way of saying, I've got to get my son to school. But then eventually, once she sort of had her few minutes to vent her frustration and her anger, and then people tend to calm down. And sometimes you can have a bit of conversation. And she started saying, what's this about? I don't know what it's about. And I said, you know, would you like me to explain or tell you? And she said, yes. And we had a couple of minutes and she still was a bit pissed off and she wasn't really going to accept it. But, you know, she heard something and she understood something and then she went away. And so, yes, there have been scenes of people being dragged, but they actually haven't been the majority.
No.
You know, it hasn't come to that. And yeah, so, you know, what else do you do? You know, what else do you do? We've tried everything else. And, you know, we keep saying, has anybody got a better idea? Because we'll try it, you know, within the limits of the resources that we have, you know. So
and I'm guessing if we had a government that didn't spend most of its time hiding the money in the tax havens abroad, and if we actually weren't climate deniers and actually faced up to the horrendous outcomes that are on our doorstep in terms of climatic change, then we wouldn't need these demonstrations, we wouldn't need these activities, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. So ultimately the problem always goes back to the fact that we have, unfortunately, government after government after government who put their own interests above ours. And that short-termism, reactionary nature of them means that, you know, we're always staring at the apocalypse because they're never prepared to do anything further back that reduces the probability of that outcome.
No, I mean, you know, I mean, how I see it is that, you know, we have, you know, we do have democracy in, you know, we are, in a democratic system, but, you know, it's been so manipulated and distorted by money. We know that, don't we? And so whilst we vote in a government who actually in theory have powers, we also know, you know, behind the scenes, there's a lot of pressure on them around money, and a lot of them are very corrupt and are happy to take that money. And I think just see it as a stepping stone, get in there, take loads of money and move on. So, and throughout the centuries, ordinary people have had to fight for their rights and fight for anything that's good. You know, just look at the Tolpuddle martyrs, for example. Just look at the suffragettes. I mean, if you've read about the suffragettes, some of the awful things that happened to them, you know, they were ostracized by their community. You know, they were beaten by people who lived in their streets. You know, they were thrown into jail. They were raped in jail. They were force-fed in jail. They lost their jobs. They lost their families. But yet they kept going, a lot of them. And it's usually the ordinary working class people that those sorts of atrocious things happen to. It's not the more educated at the top who, you know, they don't end up with those sorts of penalties, really. And that was votes for women, you know, and these people were sort of like demonized by society as we're being now, you know, and we're not using bombs, we're using what we call non-violent direct action. Have you heard of that, NVDA? So sort of following the lines of a lot of the freedom riders. Have you watched that film, The Freedom Riders, on YouTube?
I haven't.
It's a documentary and it's really good, and it's about the civil rights movement. You know, when 12 people decided to get on a bus and go right into the heart of the segregated South. And so they practiced and trained for non-violent direct action, and that's what we've been doing. We've had training to you know, hold our position for as long as we can and not to react. and not to escalate violence. But we know that it will, aggression will come towards us, because that's the only way we can do it. And we don't want violence, and we don't want to hurt people, etc., etc.
No.
But we are inconveniencing people. There's no doubt about that. But hopefully within that, we're waking people up and getting messages to people who might not have otherwise received them, who don't listen to Dorset Eye or read certain things.
Yeah. And thank you, Giovanna. And just to finish off then, so are you going back out now with Insulate Britain? Are you back on the trail in terms of going back in terms of the activities that are going on in different parts of the country?
Yeah, well, the campaign is continuing at the moment, and I'll be returning to that. So I'll be part of that. So if there are any things I haven't answered that you reflect on afterwards, give me a try. I don't mind trying again. But
no, brilliant.
We don't want to be hurting people, but this is like, what else can we do? And it's so easy to criticize what we're doing, but listen to the message. And you know what? If you believe in what we're doing, come and join us.
And I think also one of the final messages needs to be as well, that if so many people are complaining and do feel inconvenienced, maybe one of the approaches more broadly could be that empowerment. Basically, ask them for what they would do instead. Ask them what the alternatives are. Bring them on board by giving them that voice, because there's no better way to win people over than by them empowering them.
Yeah, and one just last thing I'll mention. You would have heard about the Chatham House report, wouldn't you?
Yes.
That went out, and so that's a very sort of credible, renowned, listened to body, isn't it? And so they are saying things like, in 20 years' time, the food yield of the earth will drop by about 30%. Can you imagine? I've just had a granddaughter. She'll be 20 then. What will you imagine a world where there are massive, significant food shortages because the climate changes and the dry areas get drier, and we can't, and the floods, and then it affects our food production. That just terrifies me. It really does. For I probably won't be here in 20 years' time, but a lot of people will. So just look around at your children and grandchildren, and I don't know why more people aren't out on the streets, really, but I've got my theories on that. So this is the next working class war. We really have to fight for our survival here, and that's what Insulate Britain are doing.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much for coming on 10 by 6, Giovanna.
Thank you very much. Thank you.